Okay guys, I am here today to talk to you guys about A Little Life, which if you watch my vlogs, which you should because that's mainly what I do here, I read this in about a week. I started it, I believe, on a Wednesday and I finished it on a Tuesday night. In the vlog in which I finished this, which is called Something and Weeping Over a Book, this is the book I'm weeping over. This is A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara, who is an American novelist, and this is a finalist of the Man Booker Prize. Now I'm going to start with telling you why you should read the book, which is the title of this video, and then I'm going to go into why you might not want to read this book, and then I'm going to go into my own thoughts on the book. So this title is kind of a lie because there will be spoilers, but when spoilers occur, it will be quite obvious. I will put a huge thing, and if you haven't read the book, you pause there. And then once you've read the book, because you should read the book, you can watch the rest of it. So A Little Life follows 4 boys. I call them boys. They are, in the beginning of the book, in their mid-20s. And the book follows them through 3 decades of their lives. So their mid-20s to their mid-50s. The 4 boys are Jude, JB, Malcolm, and Willem. JB is a Haitian-American artist who, at the beginning of the book, is struggling to solidify himself within the art world. Malcolm is a biracial architect who comes from an upper-class New York family. Willem is from Wyoming. He's Danish and Swedish by origin, and he is an aspiring actor who waits at tables. And Jude is a lawyer who has a rather secretive past that the other boys don't know much about. He walks with a limp, and he gets very intense fits of pain every so often. So those are the 4 main characters of this book. This book is narrated mainly by those main characters in a third-person omnipresent sense. So you have insight into one of the boys' thoughts at any point in time, but it is not an I narration. Third-person narration is the most common form of narration in most novels. There is one unique thing about the narration style of this book, and that is that there are 3 chapters in the book in which the narration style changes and you get a first-person narration. And the first-person narration is in the form of almost a letter, although it's not stylized as a letter. It is a letter to someone, so it uses the pronoun you. It's very interesting, and it doesn't necessarily specify who the you is at the beginning, although if you know the characters well enough, which you will because the first one happens here, which is about, I think, 200 pages in, it adds something really interesting to the novel as you get a very different perspective all of a sudden. This book is incredibly written, and that's reason number 1 that you should read it. The writing style is phenomenal, and if this author ever comes out with more novels, I'm sure they will be equally amazing, because alone, not even the plot, alone the writing style is so unique. The second reason that you should read this book is its depiction of love. So this book follows, as I mentioned, 4 friends who, as the back cheesily says, Hanya Yanagihara's stunning novel is about the families we are born into and those we make for ourselves. And while that is rather cheesy, it is quite true. It's about how we love someone and what love means and different facets of love. So what is so unique about this book is that it doesn't just show love in the classic way that we understand love, which is romantic love and platonic love. It also shows the idea of love becoming envy and love becoming something maybe a little dark and maybe a little twisted. It is also the question of loving someone who is broken, and it's about loving someone who isn't necessarily all there, who makes decisions that are bad, who makes decisions that are self-inflicting, painful, and that you can't fix someone just by loving them. And that's one of the things that gets talked about in this book a lot that is quite amazing. The idea that you don't fix someone just by loving them, but you love them nonetheless. And there's also the sense of paternal love and creating a family later in your life and loving someone as a son or loving someone as a father, which is a really cool aspect of this novel. The sense of love that gets depicted in this book is so unique because it explores the love as a realm bigger than boxes that we've placed it into, bigger than ideas of what love is. It's hard to explain, and I'm going to spend this video trying to be a little bit deeper than maybe you know me in the vlogs that I put out, because this book incites a lot of introspection. There's actually a quote that I'm going to find. So I know I have the book here, but I found the really good quote about friendship online. So I'll just read it to you here because the book's too long to find it. Why wasn't friendship as good as a relationship? Why wasn't it even better? It was two people who remained together day after day, bound not by sex or physical attraction or money or children or property, but only by the shared agreement to keep going, the mutual dedication to a union that could never be codified. Which is kind of the whole idea of the book. Love that isn't necessarily one idea. So that's the two reasons that you should definitely pick up this book. A, its narration style, its writing style is phenomenal. You will be hooked the entire time. Second, its depiction of love, its understanding, its analysis of love is so unique for a story such as this. Now, there might be some reasons that you shouldn't read this book. And that reason, which is the reason that you might have heard of, if you've heard of this book, a lot of people talk about it, is that it is incredibly violent. As I kind of hinted at, Jude has a past that is by no means happy. And you, as you read through the book, will learn more and more about that past. A lot of the book is dedicated to going backwards in time and experiencing his life from the beginning. And so I'll go through all of the trigger warnings as to things that if you can't, for whatever reason, read about them, you probably shouldn't pick up this book. The first is sexual violence. So under sexual violence, I would include sexual assault, rape, prostitution, and sexual molestation. That is a topic throughout the book. It is probably the biggest topic within the book. The next is drug addiction. Drug addiction doesn't play a huge role, but it definitely comes up. The next is self-harm, particularly in the form of cutting, so slitting or cutting one's own wrists. As well as that, you have suicide attempts, physical and child abuse. One of the main criticisms of this book is that it's a sensationalism of violence, that it is so incredibly violent and it's only violent for violence sake, to which I would argue that it is not. And there's a couple reasons for that. The first is that, well, the book is definitely, as I just went over, violent, and it has a lot of things in it that are not happy. They aren't overly depicted. And that's something that I think gets a little confuddled in people's minds. Because if you take, for example, I have it somewhere here, The Perks of Being a Wallflower, which has an undertone of something, but it's never really specified. And while you know something happened, you're not sure what it was. Here, well, it starts in kind of a undertone in a question mark. It quickly becomes understood what is going on, and there are no questions about it. There is a ton of violence in this. The amount is insane. But the actual descriptions, the writing of the violence isn't gory. It isn't necessarily graphic. It doesn't go into deep, deep details. It just has a lot of it, which I think is where that kind of idea of sensationalism comes from, in that the actual amount, not in the descriptions. So you should read this book. If you are comfortable with the idea of those triggers I mentioned, if you're not comfortable with them, it's just something that you can't read. There is no getting around it. The whole plot of the book is kind of uncovering what had happened to Jude. But if you can, the writing style of this book is phenomenal, and it's an amazing depiction of friendship. And friendship is something more than just a casual idea. Friendship is something that lasts 3 decades. So it is definitely a book that if you have the energy, and the time, I would recommend. I'm sorry if now I've just checked and I think I might have been slightly out of focus for that whole thing, but I'm not refilming this for a third time. Yes, I've already filmed this twice. So we're just gonna go for the slightly blurry effect. So now that I've talked about why you should read the book, you should end off here. You should stop watching if you haven't read the book. If you have read the book, stick around so we can talk a little more in the comments about what you liked and what you didn't like and all those kind of things. I, as you can probably tell, adored this book. This is one of those books that I read and it was so fantastic because I hadn't read something like it in so long. Honestly, I can't even compare it that well to anything else. Some things about this book that killed my soul. I spent this whole book thinking Jude was going to die. At first, you think he's going to commit suicide. And then he and Willem are together and it's the happy years and they're having a good time and you think, okay, he's going to die from some of his complications. And you're sitting there and it's the end of happy years and you open Dear Comrade and it hits you like a train. Or it hits you like a truck in a convertible. And all of a sudden, it's Willem who's dead. And it's Malcolm who's dead. And you're thinking, or I'm thinking, oh my god. I cried through the next 100 pages. Easy. Cried when I realized Willem, Malcolm, and Sophia had died. Then I realized, as Harold says, you don't have to say a eulogy, that his chapters in this book are essentially a version of a eulogy. And then I just lost. Then I was just so, I couldn't even comprehend because it is Harold's first chapter in which he talks to Willem is my favorite chapter. The part where he talks about Willem tying Jude's shoe is just so heartfelt. It is my favorite thing. It is the only thing I have bookmarked in this whole book. And I started crying all over again because I had realized that it was a eulogy of sorts. I don't think it was necessarily the actual eulogy, but it was a eulogy of sorts. It was a letter to the dead. And I started crying some more. And I couldn't believe it. And then they talk about Malcolm, who at the beginning you kind of forget, or I kind of forgot that he had even died because you're so focused on Jude's absolute sadness over Willem's death that it overshadows the fact that Malcolm is also dead. And then they go over to the Irvine's house and they all sit around that table and they have that conversation about Malcolm, and Jude remembers the incident with the bookshelf and how Malcolm was always planning for his future, which to me is maybe the most understated declaration of love in this whole book. The idea that Malcolm was always there, always willing to accept what Jude was never willing to accept, which was that Jude was going to get worse. And ready to plan for that and ready to help him into that, even when Jude was not ready to help himself into that. And that declaration of love, which is something that's so understated in the rest of the book, even though it happens in the rest of the book, hit me like a rock. JB, to me, is the character that you were designed to hate. Obviously, if you're watching this, you've read it, and JB has those two incidents where he breaks Jude's heart and he does something that as a human being you would think you would never do. Both of those things are painful in and of themselves to Jude, and they make you dislike JB a lot more because it's easy to dislike JB because he's not Willem, who is in that moment maybe the greatest character, because Jude realizes that, well, JB broke his heart, Willem never would. But I don't hate JB. And I don't think people who read this book hate JB. JB is a complicated character, but in a lot of ways, I see myself in JB. My understanding of JB, I think, is something that a lot of people might relate to, because a lot of people don't have the past that necessarily Willem or Jude do. Obviously, some people do, but I think a lot of people, especially people I know, would relate more to JB and his understanding of the world. And that makes JB a complicated character to love, A, because he is clearly not always a good person, and he's clearly has flaws, you might have a similar relationship to the idea of pain. JB wants pain because he thinks it's going to make him different. Jude obviously doesn't want pain because he hates that it makes him different. We're not all JB. I'm definitely not JB by nature by any means, but I think that there's a way to relate to him that makes him an interesting character and not just someone that you can brush off as annoying and easy to hate, I guess. I'm always fearful that I'm going to end this video, as I've filmed this twice, as I mentioned, and I'm not going to talk about this book well enough, and I'm not going to be able to put all of my ideas out there about this book. And so maybe I'll put together some more thoughts. It'll be down below if I have. If you have read this book, tell me about it. Tell me about what you liked. Tell me about what you hated. Who is your favorite character? Mine is definitely Willem. I adored this book. Tell me what to read that's like it, and tell me what to read that maybe isn't like it but you think I should read anyway. I would say subscribe, but only if you want to. I now have an upload schedule, I think, that I'm going to upload videos like this every Wednesday night and vlogs every Sunday night. From now on, my vlogs will be weekly. I have a little less of an interesting life, so you'll be seeing 7 days instead of like 2 or 3. Other than that, yeah, tell me what you thought of the book. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you read it. I hope I inspired you to read it, or if I didn't inspire you to read it, that you enjoyed it nonetheless. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one.